When We Disagree is a show about arguments, how we have them, why we have them, and their impact on our relationships and ourselves. Let's talk about verbal trickery, rhetorical sleight of hand. Those trying to trick you have many methods. The red herring distraction comes to mind. But one of the most often used is the fallacy of equivocation. You've probably encountered it without realizing it. The fallacy happens when a key term in an argument is used in multiple different ways, leading to confusion and a misleading conclusion. It's a casual deceit. Here's how it works. Someone will use a word that has multiple meanings, switching between those meanings to support their argument without acknowledging that the word's meaning has shifted. This can make the argument seem stronger than it really is. A product you love, let's say a juice or a breakfast protein bar, comes in green packaging that's decorated with woodsy scenes. You get the picture. The packaging also claims that the good people who make this juice or protein bar only use natural ingredients, under the assumption that many consumers will have a positive and fairly narrow association with the word natural and think the company is very selective about using organic ingredients, when, in reality, natural can mean damn near anything. Natural is being used here in two different senses. One implying something narrow and appealing in a marketing sense, and another more expansive way to give the company legal cover. Another concept is relevant here, lying by omission. Let's say you ask me what I did last night, and I list several things that I did: bowling, eating pizza, walking the dog, but I left out something that I did that you wouldn't like. Or you ask me who I went bowling with, and I list Jack and Jill, but I leave out a third person who you don't want me to spend time with, and I know that. In both of these cases, I'm deceiving through omission and using a fallacy of equivocation because you were asking what I did last night and who was there under the assumption that I'll be forthcoming in my answer. And I'm using that charity against you by listing things that I did, so I'm technically not lying by creating 100% false reality. I did go bowling with Jack and Jill after all, so that you won't feel threatened or betrayed by what I'm leaving out. Equivocating is a way to pull the wool over someone's eyes. It's sneaky because it can make a flawed claim sound convincing by relying on wordplay. Recognizing equivocation is important because it helps us stay focused on the actual meaning behind the words we or somebody else is using, ensuring that our discussions are grounded in clear and honest communication. At its heart, equivocation is about clarity, or the lack of it. I'm Michael Lee, Professor of Communication and Director of the Civility Initiative at the College of Charleston. Our guest today on When We Disagree is Matt Bears. Matt is the CEO of Chandler Construction Services, a specialty trade contractor in the Carolinas and Georgia. Matt, tell us an argument story.
Well, your listeners would have to go back what feels like a lifetime ago personally. Professionally, I'm still dealing with it today, and that's the middle of the COVID pandemic. It was probably a year or so into the pandemic after the Trump administration had enacted the Response Act requiring businesses of various sizes to implement, different procedures for worker safety and for public safety. And we were in a kind of an interesting spot in that we were growing the business and we were an essential business. So all of our workers had to continue to work even during the pandemic. And it doesn't take me long to go back emotionally and think back about the mask mandates. And I laugh still to this day. We couldn't get thermometers in Fahrenheit, and we were trying to calculate, Celsius, that type of thing. There were new requirements coming out. It felt like daily, and the unknown costs were hard for a small business. The challenge that I ran into and the argument that ensued was the vaccine mandate. And when the vaccine became conditionally approved by the government, it was probably 18, 24 months into the pandemic, there was discussion that it was being mandated on federal contracts and in certain workforce. And then, of course, you remember the sports teams were mandating, and there was some political backlash there. There's a lot of division politically within the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this moral dilemma on whether or not we should mandate vaccines. And ultimately, I chose to do so. We weren't required to do so. We were a small enough business. We didn't have to. OSHA was requiring it from a workforce perspective on construction sites. And still to this day, I still think almost each night when I go to bed about the disagreements that I had with probably 50% of our workforce.
Let's pause there if you don't mind and talk a little bit about why your firm was classified as an essential business to kind of set up this dilemma of whether or not you're going to require vaccines of your workers.
We're a utility contractor and critical services, water, sewer, fire protection.
Gotcha.
We were working on federal projects and municipal projects that required to bring water to.
These are the sort of basic building blocks of what we call civilization.
That's correct.
Is moving around water, sewage, etc., so we can live with this relative level of comfort. And how big is the business? How big is Chandler?
About 100 employees.
Okay. And so when the mandate was issued, because you were essential, this is in your province, you had to make a decision, but you were also small enough as a firm that you wouldn't have to. Just help me understand
that. It wasn't a
that.
requirement.
Got you.
We were at the time about 75, 80 employees, and I would say half of them were against being vaccinated, and the other half were for. It was pretty black and white.
How did you know that?
Really, I relied on the folks in the field, and the birds would tell me. I mean, I would just hear back, and that was a challenge I had. I couldn't go out and ask whether or not they wanted a mandate. If I did, I knew a significant portion of the population, of my work population, would then, if I agreed to do it, would be upset. And then if I chose not to do it, the other half would be upset.
Right.
And I had contractual obligations and work to complete. Without a workforce, if I lost half my workforce, I'd still be contractually required to do the work. So I was going to offend somebody. So I had to go with it was more of a moral and ethical dilemma on my part on how to proceed. And I had a real problem with certain employees that I personally had gone and I didn't have a problem with the employees, the logic behind employees that I had gone personally with and gotten a flu vaccine.
Right.
Many of our employees, because of the type of work we're on, are required to have Hep A and Hep B shots. So there's other vaccines that people willfully would have taken or had taken. And in this specific case, they were pushing back. And it was a real challenge, and the outcome was favorable. But I still deal with it today because it really came down to the trust and more of I hate to say a maternal component on my part. I had to make a decision on behalf of the company as a whole. And it was me. There wasn't no one I could lean on. I couldn't go to anybody else in the organization and ask their opinion. Ultimately, it came down to me and it was strangely not business related.
And you have to adjudicate this dispute about science, this dispute about vaccines, but also make decisions for your employees about what they are going to put in their bodies.
The personal liberty aspect of it that I had to think through compared to the public and personal safety. If you can imagine, I mean, driving down the road with 4 or 5 employees in the same crew truck.
Okay.
And then they're going home to their families. And I don't know who they have at home with their family, if it's a vulnerable portion of the population.
Yeah.
I didn't know if they had young children, pregnant spouses. I mean, I had no concept of who I would be exposing if I failed to do what I thought was the minimum reasonable standard for protecting our workforce and the greater public. And we went ahead and pulled the trigger and sent the mandate out and required it. And I had employees actually quiz me and test me that you're not actually going to require me to get a shot. And when we did, I mean, I think we lost 2 out of 70 something employees. I mean, due to the mandate in hindsight. So somehow I was effectively able to persuade the rest of the population to stay and to do what personally I felt was the moral obligation that I had to fulfill.
Right. And they have a choice, of course. It's not like they're at gunpoint, but the choices are really a tough one, which is they're going to lose their job. And then all of the arguments you're talking about in terms of who's at home, is there somebody immunocompromised? Do they have young children? All of those arguments are also a real risk and a real factor if a person no longer has an income.
And on top of that, you're trying to navigate the constant changes. There were whether or not they had had COVID in the past,
Right.
and whether or not they could get the shot immediately.
Uh-huh.
And it worked out timing wise because of the holidays is what really, I woke up one morning, it was September timeframe. I remember it well when we put out the mandate. And I knew that if I didn't get the workforce fully vaccinated before the holidays, we'd come back in January with a workforce that was down and possibly, family deaths. And I had dealt as a business owner of a small business. I mean, I always joke with folks. I'm a lender of last resort. I'm a marriage counselor.
Right.
In this specific case, I didn't want to be a funeral director.
Well, but you also found yourself as a kind of unwitting surgeon general as well to take on another role, which is to say adjudicating scientific questions that are incredibly difficult amidst a crisis and shifting senses of viral loads and all of the kinds of sciencey words that we all learned 4 or 5 years ago.
That was the hardest part of it. It was, it could have been laughable at times, and we probably could make a sitcom out of it.
Yeah.
In hindsight, it wasn't funny at the time.
No.
But I vividly remember trying to better understand so I could communicate. But I had to be careful, and I had to tell them when I didn't know. And I did have, and that's how I kind of figured out after the fact. It validated what I was told on the front end that we were going to get the pushback. Once I mandated it, those folks that came to the table and said, "Hey, this isn't right.
Yeah,
I can't be forced to do it. I need my job." And there were provisions in the Response Act that, as far as payment and when employees could take time off and under what conditions, and trying to navigate all that along with the scientific jargon was a constant struggle.
And to be clear, you have no background or training in virology, immunology,
I do not.
epidemiology.
No, I'm a ditch digger.
And so, as a ditch digger, did you find yourself arguing about these scientific questions, standing 6 feet apart? How communicable is this disease? What's really in the vaccine? How effective is the vaccine? Did you find yourself in sciencey arguments with other ditch diggers?
Absolutely. It was, again, it could have been comical in a sitcom in that you have this mask on and you can envision yourself standing 6 feet apart. And as the more aggravated you got, right, having the discussions, people are taking their mask down, like to better express themselves.
Right.
But it was a different time. And in hindsight, I don't know how I could have handled it. I wouldn't have handled it any different now that I know the facts.
Yeah.
But I didn't have the facts at the time. And it was an interesting thing because I still find myself relitigating. Even today, I have this, I always joke about the bringing a binder in with me as far as a notepad of all the scientific, facts now or the data now.
Yeah.
I didn't have that at the time. And I don't remember those facts in the arguments, but I remember the feelings. I remember how I felt going through the process, knowing that I didn't want to be responsible for the death of an individual when there's something simple that I could have done to avoid it.
Right. But you can also imagine this just taking an opposite side and trying to put myself in the dilemma that you were in, which is to say, I am not a scientist. I feel very strongly about not violating people's personal liberties. And so do I want to fire somebody because they won't take something that I don't really understand?
And the risk of going out of business if everyone revolted against it and said they wouldn't do it. I had that constant challenge as well.
Sort of the financial risk, you're like self-preservation, company preservation. And then that's true for all your employees too, right? The business goes down, that's bad for people's lives, but also if people are getting COVID when COVID is easily preventable with a vaccine, also really bad for people's lives and business. And so stuck in this kind of impossible, vexing set of circumstances here. What I'm interested in is, as you talk about this at a high level, you are not second guessing what you did. It doesn't sound like you would do much differently. Now that I know the facts, I would have done things even quicker. Yeah,
an easier decision.
before I get to this big question, let me back up and ask that question. What, if anything, would you have done differently? You would have moved more quickly? What does that mean?
I would have better educated the workforce with the knowledge that we have now. Again, I'm a student of the history, and what I've learned in the process and what I know to be factual now. There was just so much bad information at the time coming from all different directions. Now I know what would have worked and what wouldn't have worked. I mean, again, they're taking the temperatures with the laughing about doing it in Celsius,
Right.
And the plastic in front of the windows when you walked up to the office, and having only 4 people in the truck instead of 5, so the middle seat was empty type deal.
And this kind of mask, but not that type of mask.
Right.
And
all that I would have done differently.
yeah. Do you think that would have been effective? In other words, do you have faith that you could have put on kind of science education programming that would have been persuasive?
I don't know if I could have. That's a very good question. I don't believe I would have known enough even today to have done things differently, because I don't have the luxury of knowing what didn't happen.
That's right.
If we didn't vaccinate the workforce, none of our employees died. None of them were hospitalized that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of any immediate family members. So statistically, in hindsight, I think we helped the situation. And then I look back, collectively at the data today, and the states that had the highest vaccination still had the least vulnerable, the least amount of vulnerable residents affected and hospitalized and dying. So, I mean, all that suggests that the vaccine actually worked as far as keeping our workforce safe.
Do you know other people in your similar position, other folks in your field, other CEOs who made different decisions in terms of mandating the vaccine of their employees?
Most of them told me I shouldn't do it. I couldn't do it. The trade partners that I have thought it was a bad idea. Many of them joked with me, off the record, that they'll pick up my employees that don't want to, don't want to go through with the jab. But it worked out pretty well, and it was. And like I said, in hindsight, it was very fulfilling to know that we still have the workforce, and we've grown since then.
You felt pretty isolated, at least compared to other people in your position.
Very much so. So it was a lonely place and a lonely time.
What do you think, what compelled you to take what seems like it would have been a harder road, given the relative loneliness and controversy you were embracing, given this industry?
Don't know what I could have done different. I really don't. I don't have even looking back, I think of the analogy I kept going to is, the automotive manufacturers and car dealers and maintenance folks tell you get your oil changed every 5,000 miles or 20,000 miles. I know there's people out there that don't change their oil ever, and the car runs 50,000 miles or 100,000 miles, right? And those people are out there saying, hey, you're a fool for spending $150 to get your oil changed, right? You don't know unless the car stops running. And I wouldn't have known unless somebody was seriously ill, hospitalized, or died. And in hindsight, I didn't have that. And we're just a small token of the overall data set. But it was, like I said, it was reassuring that it actually worked, and we worked through it.
And the big question I was working towards is about your memory of this. And you said that you often find yourself at night and other times relitigating it, and you can get into the feeling of it so powerfully. So on the one hand, it sounds like an impossible situation, and what is personally dangerous, professionally dangerous, morally dangerous, complicated. There's so many unknown unknowns. So truly a vexing position. But you feel strong in your conviction. You feel like you did what you did out of the morally right path, even if it was also somewhat risky. Came out better on the other side, protected workers. So I don't hear a lot of second guessing on your behalf.
No.
So why do you go back and relitigate it, do you think?
It's still stressful today because we're still getting COVID vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
On the personal front, with my own family, my wife of 30 years, while she's supportive and agreeing with me from a standpoint of the importance of the vaccination, doesn't understand that vaccinating unless you're the vulnerable. At the time, I had my eldest was in college and an adult. I couldn't tell her what to do. And my youngest was still in high school, and I really could tell him what to do. And fortunately, I had the oldest one chose to get vaccinated without my having to push it, being an adult, and my youngest one wouldn't do it kicking and screaming until eventually sports teams all of a sudden overruled dad. So the maternal or paternal instinct that you have, and you're trying to keep your children safe and healthy and listen to you and what you think is best for them. When your own children don't listen to you, it's hard to imagine that your 100 employees would.
And sometimes it can go the other direction. Strangers might listen to you more quickly.
Exactly.
I often like to conclude these shows by asking people what they've learned from these conflicts. As I'm asking this of you, I'm struck by how trite this question is, because there are moral, philosophical, familial, scientific, et cetera, lessons to be learned here. But top of mind, after 4 or 5 years of thinking about this impossible decision you had, what's the lesson?
The lesson for me has been you have to trust yourself and not argue for the sake of arguing, but to better understand what other people's positions are going to be. And if you take the time to better understand where they're coming from, it at least gives you an opportunity to cordially communicate and agree to disagree.
Yeah.
And in this case, it just ended up with a few folks losing their jobs, and it's better than a few folks losing their lives.
Matt Bears, thank you so much for being on When We Disagree.
It's a joy being in the studio. Thanks, Mike.
When We Disagree is recorded at the College of Charleston with creator and host Michael Lee. Recording and sound engineering by Jesse Kunz and Lance Laidlaw. Reach out to us at whenwedisagree@gmail.com.